I am doing this recording because the presentation that I gave on AI and cybersecurity challenges and opportunities wasn't recorded, and some people have expressed some interest in seeing that recording. And I wanted to also make sure that I was able to fully cover some of the things that were there in cyber. And in the future, this may be something that my students may want to see. But this is a Cyber Summit event that was put on by the Longview Chamber of Commerce, and it brought together industry representatives. Uh, it, we brought in educators and also students in this case. So it was an event with some wide-reaching audiences as well. There was a speaker from Maternal University on cybersecurity. Uh, that was before this event, and Dr. Glenn Gowing, and he actually took us through the basics of what information was and why we want to provide assurance that it's quality information, and also the cybersecurity challenges that are associated with doing that. And so that kind of led right into this talk, which is where we are looking at presently and going into the future. And so hopefully I can share that with you today and open a forum, just a dialogue online along with this video for other questions. And um, it's a Cyber Summit. This is the second year for it, and we also have some speakers from Department of Commerce and the U.S. Secret Service also, and just discussing protection and best practices. But I want to get started and just give you some ideas who I am. I am an instructor at Kilgore College. I have been, this is my sixth year teaching. I came over from industry. I worked in telecommunications, 23 years there from some of the beginning, primitive, doing the basic help desk work, and moving up through more advanced telecom, including working for all telecommunications, Verizon Wireless Communications, and then into an internet service provider role where I performed network engineering. And that was my first real application in cybersecurity, but I'd studied cybersecurity for quite some time before, but never necessarily practiced it until the role that I spent about 12 years as a network engineer for an internet service provider. I also am a doctoral student studying human resource development at UT Tyler in that program. And so my talk today will bring forward a little bit more, a little bit less tech, a little bit more people. So I intend to be a bridge in that category because I am a technical person and teach um, at Kilgore College. I teach cybersecurity, I teach networking, I teach operating systems in the computer and information technology department, but I also study business, how to do our best at employing humans and people, and you'll see that more often. The word human resource. Maybe it needs to change to people. I don't know. So, um, but that is something that's going on now. And for me, it's the doctoral study. I'm about halfway through my program of coursework, and getting opportunities every day to learn more about that field. I also am a co-PI, and that stands for Principal Investigator, for our NSF grant at KC. This is our first National Science Foundation grant, and it is designed to really invest in our CIT program, and basically do some groundwork and development work for our college in terms of building relationships with industry, reducing the barriers that students have to get more skilled technical graduates into the workforce, so that we can really um, talk about getting people into the labor force, and our employers and our industry partners can have great um, students that transition into lifelong employees. Um, and so that is work that's ongoing. We're just getting started in it. But what I have, who we have in the room today at the Cyber Summit is we have industry professionals that are in this area, that have been doing what they do for a long time. But obviously, because they're business professionals, they're looking to grow their business. They're looking to create an employee pipeline. And so we invite those industry partners to join alongside us. We're building something called a business industry leadership team, which is going to change the way our organization thinks about curriculum development and thinks about skills development. We want to put the power of creating skills that employers need in the hands of our industry partners, and then we go out and make that happen for them, because we know we know that employees need to be ready to hit the ground running. And so, another thing I have done this summer is we were part of a national security agency NSA grant called Gen Cyber. We put on the Gen Cyber Institute at KC. I was a lead instructor for that program, and it's kind of like a co-PI, a position there in that, but I focused on curriculum development for cybersecurity. We got 30 instructors, 30 educators from around East Texas, and these are not just technical instructors, but we got English teachers, we got math teachers, we got theater teachers, we got dance instructors, we got people who had all different types of backgrounds that were directly touching students. So the idea was to get them versed in cybersecurity. I gave them a technical push into the world of IT and cyber, and it was enough to get them excited about cybersecurity. And we put them on a mission to deliver some cybersecurity instruction for their students in their way. And so we ended up, this is the last event for that program. We got our Gen Cyber instructors to come to this Cyber Summit as a capstone event. They brought students with them. So in the room at the Cyber Summit event, we had high school students, we had college students. Some of my college students were in the room. Which represent our workforce pipeline, and then we have the industry partners and leaders that are there learning also. So this is a focus on partnership with community and building that workforce pipeline. So, but back to the crux of the matter. What is AI? And our AI challenges and opportunities is where we want to focus. And so we have those in this field. They are great. But I want to just start, first of all, with what is AI, and we're going to look at a couple of different things. AI is basically advanced computing that is brought against things like language, things like images. And so we've entered a new realm of advanced computing in this day and age. The paradigms that we had before of data processing, of centralized computing, those are changing. We're still moving into the centralized data processing, but we're seeing that in the form of AI. And so you may have heard of ChatGPT, but there's another type of AI that produces images. And so I went and started this by asking the image producer AI, what does AI look like? And this is the image that was generated. The model used deepai.org. That was the website that I used to generate this image. And what we can see about it is it looks pretty cool. It's a really cool image that had lots of depth. Has the photographic bokeh. You see the lights that are in the background are blurry circles. It's a really beautiful rendition of that. And it has good shadow, and there's early um, early models definitely did not do this good in terms of creating images. It was very hard to do that. But so this is the look of advanced computing. And so what happens is the training data, we give this computer program lots and lots and lots and lots of data, and lots of data in the form of images. And so what it does is it basically takes those data and creates topics around those images, and then it will predict basically where the next pixel should be based on all the training data that it received, and it will basically build out this image and present it. And sometimes it has a little bit of strangeness to it. So I went ahead and made a prompt that was a little more complicated. I said, pretend you are a computer scientist and you've recently taken up oil painting. In the style of Vincent van Gogh, please show me what AI looks like. And so you notice that it found those keywords, right? And it has this eerie Vincent van Gogh Starry Night look to the painting, and then there's this skeleton robot. He's a little bit on the weird side, sitting there looking at it, and we start to think about this thing and thought we knew what AI looked like, but this is a little bit on the dark side, right? So my humanity kicks in and I go, this doesn't look like me. It looks different. So what I am experiencing here is uh, called uncanny valley. And so when I look at the issues with AI and I do something and I tell it to do something for me, and then it comes back with something I didn't expect. This is uncanny valley. When we come face to face with something, we realize that we hate it and or fear it. It doesn't look like us, right? This is not me. I in general, humans expect to see humans represented in art. We have trained ourselves to see our own reality in our art, and so seeing another reality come out in art is a really weird feeling. And so this is something that we will see going forward in the future as AI is more involved because it doesn't have the experiences that I have as a person. It doesn't have the combined collective history that I have. And so it generates these things that are really off the wall. And so we have to be vigilant about what it is. And but I wanted to talk about what actually might be happening here is if we decide that we want to use AI and we're forward thinking about it, one of the things that could happen is that we have confirmation bias. And what that means is we make sense of things that we see. It is something that if we want to see it, if we want to use it, we make sense of it in our own way, and we ignore some things that might come up to be something quite important. Our brains extrapolate information, and so we will look at what that looks like and how that works. And keeping in mind cybersecurity ideas is that we have to make sure in cyber we're on the edge, and so from the cybersecurity perspective, we have to find things that don't fit, and that is part of our job as cybersecurity professionals. Is we look at where things meet and we find out what doesn't fit, and that is our point of focus. Okay. So I gave an AI another prompt, and one of the things that happens in AI is training data is pushed through the AI model, and we have a problem called the banana problem. So I'll show you this. I told the AI, I said, "Show me one banana." Now, thing about AI is that it cannot count, obviously. It does not really have the idea and understanding that one is any different than another article or word, right? So um, it it does deal with things like many or few. These are relative number terms, but specific number terms not very good. In this case, one of the reasons why this happened is training data has generally shown the AI algorithm multiple bananas, and so bananas come in bunches, not in singles. And so normal data that the AI would have always shows more than one banana. So when we pick a banana and we say banana, when we categorize it, um, as a yellow oblong fruit, right? In its natural state, it is always multiple bananas. And so AI doesn't really know how to generate an image um, without with just one. So there's another thing that happened, and you may have experienced some confirmation bias in a processing of this image. There's something specific in this that AI also cannot do very well. And this doesn't necessarily have to do with training data, it has to do with understanding rules. So if you look really closely at this image, let's you to look at the fingers of this photograph of a child, and it is an AI, obviously AI generated image because the child has five regular full fingers. Now, normal people have four fingers and one thumb, so they have five digits. But AI generally has a very big problem doing things with fingers. It's just something that it's very interesting. Now, some of those things are being reduced. They're being trained for and tracked for, but it's pretty slow going on that. Now, in this case, I also went ahead and I gave the model a different prompt, and I wanted to see how well it did with generating images based on a good big description. So I gave it a little bit of a complex prompt that's has a little bit of nonsense in it. So here's our nonsense. I said, pretend that you're a pastry maker. Please understand that I do not like chocolate. Are you live in France, Paris? All right. And so I gave it a little, obviously, I wouldn't normally talk like that. I wouldn't ask it if he lives in France, or I wouldn't say France, Paris. Um, but I did tell it specifically that I do not like chocolate. Now, it happened to give me image of a chocolate tart, I guess. That's what that is. And so it's very interesting. It gave me a heart on there. I didn't necessarily ask it that. I just told it exactly what I wrote there. Um, and so obviously it looked at some keywords. It didn't actually look at the sentiment that I gave it that said, I do not like chocolate. Right. So it was just looking at keywords, and it did that. Now, every model is a little bit different. So there's several different models made by different manufacturers, and they operate a little bit differently. And so what you experience in one may or may not carry over to another. But in this case, this is a what's called a multimodal model. It deals with pictures and or other data. And so we also have other models that in this case are text only models, right? So this is Chat GPT as an example that I will use next. I took the same prompt and I put it in Chat GPT. And Chat GPT is not trained to use all of its power to generate images. It's trained to use its power to generate text. And so we'll see its answer. As your pastry maker, I'd be happy to create some delicious treats for you. While I'm not actually based in Paris, I can definitely imagine myself there crafting pastries in a quaint Parisian bakery. Since you don't like chocolate, I can focus on delightful alternatives like fruit tarts, eclairs, filled with vanilla or coffee cream, madeleines, or buttery croissants. What type of pastries do you enjoy most? So, as we see that the Chat GPT algorithm is designed to tell stories. And so it is designed to create environments, tell stories. I told it to pretend, right? And so it did that very thing. Um, now you get various results based on the prompt that you use. But in this case, uh, it it did it did indicate that it understood that I do not like chocolate. So it read that whole phrase. And what the algorithm is doing is it's predictively placing characters that are generally known to come um, next. So it's if I have an S, right? Since you don't like chocolate, this algorithm is processing this data and it is actually building out the sentence structure at the same time that it's building out the bigger structure of thought. So there's multiple layers of processing going on. Now, I went ahead and gave it another prompt. And I said, please give me a recipe for a chocolate tart. And it actually said, since you don't like chocolate, right? And so it remembered that I had told it I don't like chocolate. And it asked me for an alternative. So this algorithm is designed to converse with me. Um, it wants to converse. That's how it's built. It is designed to do that thing. And so what will happen is the algorithm will be designed for a specific purpose. And we see that in image creation, we see that in the general chatting. It does have the attentions, not attention span, but it has the IQ of probably a person who is in high school educated, initial college level. Later models will actually add some more equivalent general intelligence. However, we have to remember that we cannot anthropomorphize the AI. We cannot put human characteristics into the AI. It doesn't think, it doesn't see, it doesn't try, it doesn't do anything that humans can do. It merely computes. And so what we will hear is we will hear the marketing side of things try and make the AI more human, and that is something that we should remain very vigilant for. And so there are really two sides to AI, and that is there's an operational side and there is a marketing side. The operational side is how we use AI, what we do with it, what we know enough to do with it. It's how we implement it, right? And this is where the real um, rubber meets the road, so to speak. It's where we see where we might see cost savings, where we might see savings in time and energy after a certain amount of preparation. From the marketing side, this is the side that probably drives you crazy. You hear everything has AI. Every device has AI. Every piece of software has AI built into it. The marketers are telling me this is what I hear about the AI, how everybody could use it, what's supposed to do, right? What is it supposed to do? And so these are the messages that we hear. We have to divide the marketing advertising message from the operational truth. So yes, the AI can be advanced. We can use it to do things that we have not been able to do because it can't save us time. We have to stage that. We have to build it in a very smart way. But like we see, we have to understand that AI has errors, it has glitches, and it's not perfect. And so when we rely on it to do things, we have to be extremely critical of it, okay? Because we are, in fact, trying to use it to be more efficient. Just some statistics to give you, and with statistics, um, we can build whatever we want into statistics. We can make it say whatever we want, but in this case, these are some statistics I found. 72% of businesses believe that it simplifies work. Only 35% of businesses now use it. However, in our devices, 77% of our devices, these are our phones, our computers, our devices, they have a AI component that is built either to interface with it or to somehow use the data that it generates to do more. Now, that is a very broad number, right? And we don't necessarily understand that there could be a whole range of things. But what we see is that also with that 35% adoption curve, which is pretty high probably at this point, but it is where we are. We're in a semi-mature stage of adoption with AI. We can see that 80% of retail executives plan to adopt AI, and 90% of businesses are in some way investing in AI. So, from the perspective of the data, the the curve is that everything is rising. We are building, investing, changing with the idea of AI in mind. So, if you're out there and you think, I don't know about AI, I don't know what to do, I don't really understand it. Now is the time to begin to try and understand it because it's not going to go away. But what we have to do is we have to make sure that we are able to function with it around us. We have to make sure that we can police it, that we can criticize it, that we can be the control over it. Okay. So I want to show you where we are in the situation of that push to do more 35% of businesses have adopted it, but how many are investing in it? 90%. Here's where we are. We're calling this the hype cycle. This is a Gartner report. Gartner is a consulting firm. They do emergent technology reporting. And so, interestingly enough, we have our generative AI at the top of the curve. You look there. Basically, this is the function of what is happening, what is maturing. And so different things that are on this curve are beginning to mature, they're beginning to grow. And generative AI just happens to be one of those things that are reaching the peak. And so the other technologies that are down toward the bottom, augmented financial operations, neural symbolic AI, post-quantum cryptography, AI simulation, right? Those are all technologies that are in different stages of development and they're different stages of growth. But so what you see through this is that the next stage after the peak is the trough disillusionment, right? This is where investment begins to start decreasing. It is where people who have invested in certain parts of the technology begin to retract. It is where um, maybe some companies go out of business or they change, or we start to see some movement in the market. And so this is where, and you notice that's a very steep drop, going from the peak to the trough. That is the environment that is um, there's hard and fast, right? And so there's going to be money lost, technology dies, companies migrate and change, and so that happens. But at the same time, there are technologies that are growing in prominence through this peaking process. But at some point, you see that the slope of enlightenment and the plateau of productivity, right? These are areas where we tend to see a mainstream adoption, a normalization. And you notice, based on this depiction of the industry, we're not there yet, right? Nothing is there yet. This is experimentation phase. And so that's what you need to be thinking about. But what's happening now is that we're seeing this focus that has happened in centralized computing and processing of AI. We are seeing things that are moving on the chips. So with our consumer devices, the AI algorithms themselves are being placed on the microprocessor. The Qualcomm Snapdragon processor, Apple Intelligence are examples of those. They have placed them in the actual on-chip processing. They say that that's more private. It doesn't let your data have to be transmitted through the cloud. But we're also seeing advances in industrialized processors. One of the biggest ones, NVIDIA, the NVIDIA Blackwell processor that has just been developed. The report was that Elon Musk installed 200,000 of the Blackwell processors at a facility that did it in 19 days. And so that is a really, really big thing. But it shows how technology is moving fast. The Cerebras processor, this is a processor with over 150,000 AI cores in it. It is what you would call, and what we call in industry, a large scale, application specific integrated circuit. And so these are things that are put in server data centers in large racks. they're designed to do one thing and one thing only, and it is very specific calculations um, involving essentially multiplication of values. So it does it in sync, um, very fast, and it takes your input and it runs the algorithm on it, and it produces the output. But the cybersecurity concern is that this data is in motion. It has to be transferred through the network, operated on, and transferred back. So with the processors that are being put in devices, what we're seeing is we cut the transfer out of the equation, and the things that we could do that people want done, they can just be handled on the chip. And so the complex tasks are still being handled by these industrial processors. The very specific, industry specific AI workloads are still being handled in the data center cloud. And from cybersecurity, what we see in these AI systems that are designed to do very specific things, we see the most common is packet filtering. And so packet filtering is where we want to get as much data as we can um, filtered properly. And this is where threat intelligence comes in. So we have new products in cybersecurity. These are also called expert systems or narrowband AI. And this is the concept that we need these. We have so much data coming to us in the cybersecurity world. We have got to have some applications that make sense of that data in a very algorithmic way. We keep um, human beings, people make many errors from time to time, and so the idea is that um, algorithmically handling this will reduce that. Um, I think that we still need to be very critical of that process. We need to make sure we have quality control um, processes in place because we do want to make sure that um, these products that are designed to handle large amounts of workload are really handling them appropriately. And so those are the next big things that we're going to see in terms of AI is as we get these expert systems, large systems that handle more and more data, we're going to need to be more and more quality focused in how we use that data. But here's the biggest question that I get asked. Will AI replace me? So the short answer is no. It will not replace you. It's going to change the way we work. It's going to change the jobs that we have, and it may change the level of transactional work that we do. It will not replace you. So we have to think about who we are, what we learn, what we know, and what we bring to the equation. And so jobs are going to be there. They're going to require certain skills. It's going to change. It will change the way we work. But a case in point, uh, in um, in this, I got asked this the other day, and someone asked me, Mr. Darden, will AI take the help desk jobs away? And my answer to him was, well, have you used an AI chatbot recently? And every website has them, and they are, if you notice, they're varying qualities of good or bad. Most are bad. So it's not going to take your it's not going to take your job away. It'll just change the way you work. So, case in point, I told this AI to generate a picture with only the word no and it ended up doing what we call a little bit of hallucination, and it ended up putting in the word mo twice. So you see that M-O. Um, I cannot, I cannot bet on AI doing a perfect job, right? It will not do a perfect job. So, what we're going to see is that we will either become more tolerant of errors, or we will have ways to refine those errors. And I think that we're not going to be able to become more tolerant of errors in things that matter. Right. So this image, it really doesn't matter that much. But in expert systems where things do matter, our tolerance for errors have to be very, very low. And that means that need to have people that are there, that are designed and that design their work so that they can see those errors and take action on it. We will become, in one way or another, a form of filter, content filter for AI. So here's what research shows about how to be the best is that we need to be transparent, and we need our AI algorithms to be transparent. We need to understand how it works, and we don't need to feel like there's lots of stuff happening in the background and we can't control it. We have to focus on people. We have to remain skeptical. Our sense of skepticism is our most valuable weapon, both as people and as cybersecurity professionals, because my skepticism is what keeps me grounded, and so that's very important. But how do I function in an environment, right, and begin to be a person that learns? Is I have to create experiments. I have to be able to say, we're going to test something. This is a test. We want to see how it works, if it works, and if we like it, if we can deal with it, and what we need to do in order to make it work. Right. So it is an experiment that we do. That is our role in working with this AI, because it's a very experimental technology, even though it's moving very fast. And the most important thing we can do is we can make room for feedback. We need to build these teams of people that are diverse in our organizations that can give us real feedback of whether or not a particular solution that we're using, whether it's to handle automation or to handle design or to handle cybersecurity events. We got to really be serious about asking whether or not these things are working and how well they work. And so feedback is very important. It's very important from our workplace culture that we put that in. So here's our best practices. We have to embrace learning. We cannot anthropomorphize the AI. Remember, it does not think, it doesn't try, it doesn't understand, it doesn't do any of the things that humans can do. We cannot give that away, right? The marketers will tell us that the AI can do all these things and that it's just like us. But operationally, we have to know it is a computer and it computes. That is it. The next thing is we got to get back to basics. We got to remember and understand our basic understanding of computing, our basic understanding of cybersecurity and why we do what we do. And that's why Dr. Gowing's talk about the basics of information and information assurance was so important. Because no matter where we are in our cybersecurity world, we have to understand that getting a greater grasp on what's going on in AI means we get back to basics. Cybersecurity happens on the edge. This is where things meet, where the system meets the person, where a system meets another system. That is where cybersecurity events happen, and that's where we have to be. In cybersecurity, AI does make sense Because of the vast amount of information that we have to deal with and contend with, it makes sense to use it. But there's two large challenges that we have in that, and that is bias, and that is human bias and algorithm bias, and ownership of data. Who owns the data? We have to be sure we understand that at every point in the game. Your data is yours, my data is mine, and I have to be aware of where it goes and where I put it, and who owns it. And so that's going to be a challenge that we have going forward. Is as we work with different organizations, different providers of services, as AI is centralized in the cloud and it is brought out to the edge by the services that we use. Um, we need to be understanding in the whole situation and the whole time where our data is, who owns the data. All right. And so that means you have to be very careful about what data you put in a model that's free. The free model it gives you zero privacy or protection. And I would say also, even if you have a service level agreement on your data privacy, you should also be very, very careful. Maintain your skepticism because as a cybersecurity professional, what we know is that when a breach happens, when that breach happens, not if, because we don't talk about if, we talk about when, right? All of the data that have handed over to another person becomes property of someone else, right? So it's about this pipeline of data, where it goes, where it travels. We always need to be very, very aware of that. And so that is the two largest challenges in terms of this technology. And I think when we get back to basics and we look at it, we're always going to come back down to these two things. This is the core of what it is. And when we look at how to make the algorithms better, we are absolutely addressing bias. When we look at how to make the business side better, we're generally always addressing some form of the data privacy or operations. So we'll look at the couple different things real quick. These are the top 10 open web application security platform, OWASP. This is an organization that actually looks at the top threats. And so adversarial attacks, these are attacks where AI is actually manipulated into maybe attacking another algorithm. These are all humans that are behind this. People are behind this. And so if there's anything out there that's good or that works or that's successful, there's going to be somebody who wants to thwart it, who wants to compete with it, who wants to break it. And that is what these things do. So we can poison the data. An example would be if I were to corrupt the training data on a specific algorithm, I could make that algorithm effectively. What we might have to do if we corrupted the training data is we have to start over. And so training an algorithm is very costly. It's the most costly expense of actually producing it, millions and millions of dollars. In some cases, they're saying hundreds of millions of dollars. And so the economic reward, if I poison an algorithm with bad data, is that I might buy someone else some more time to capture a foothold in the marketplace, or put someone out of business. Okay, bias and fairness. This is my opinion. This should probably be number one. And how we use an algorithm, what we do with it. There's bias. There's bias at all levels. There's never a way to get away from bias. And of course, privacy is a very important because, and you may say, many people who watch this may not have a cybersecurity experience, so to speak. When I talk about privacy, I do not talk about it in the sense that um, well, I don't have anything to hide, or why should I worry about privacy? But the real issue is yes, you do. All of your data is yours, and so it's not about hiding. So the problem with privacy is we seem to have attached something to it that's not really there, and that it's not about hiding. In the sense that I hide something bad that I don't want someone to see, right? We have to scratch that from our memory banks. Idea of privacy is ownership of keeping things that I own out of public view. And the reason why that's important is because we never know who the public is. The public is not for you. Never will it do what's right for you. The public is everybody who's against you in the data world. So anyone who could take some information and use it to do something against you as who you're protecting your data from. So that's something to really consider and think about. I could do a whole video just on that. The next thing, explainability, accountability. We want to be able to explain and understand and also track what's happening with AI. And so AI, if we actually utilize it, we will have to generate and create different ways in which to log the data, that the decision-making data. At some point, we will have an AI that just unravels the decisions of another AI, right? And so it's going to be a whole systems thinking situation where we will build systems of systems just to track and understand what happened in the situation. It hasn't happened yet. It will. The legal world will play a part in that. We will see sweeping changes in how this technology works because of accountability and explainability. And then, of course, security of the pipeline, right? There's always issues. I try to encrypt everything, right? Everyone does. But what we found, at least in the encryption world, is that there are holes, and there are always holes. There's always going to be something that comes up that we didn't expect, and something we need to be aware of. So, just to close out, in terms of what is in the bigger picture, right, of ethics that may be important. This is a Organization for Economic Development. This is a global group that the United States is a part of, and so in the United States, we have created this idea of um, we want things that we generate and create in AI to work to include people, to be sustainable, to focus on well-being, especially transparency, explainability. These are things that the government of the United States and other countries around the world have committed to doing. But again, they're very, very high level. Doesn't tell me anything about how I should implement it. It doesn't. It does tell me, in a sense, um, when the when the governments of the world are looking at the legal frameworks that they build, they're going to focus in this direction, as opposed to other countries that may or may not um, be part of that. So these are some countries, G20, that are not committed to the standards of ethical AI. And you see some bad actors there. And so we have to remember that we are still in a geopolitical world. I should fully expect that China and Russia and India are going to create AIs that try to actively attack me and attack the things that I'm doing. That is pretty common in the cybersecurity world. We are geopolitical. We make decisions based on who our enemies are. And while some of these countries may not necessarily be our discrete enemies, they do not necessarily subscribe to the same standards. And so well, we should be skeptical. But that's all I'm going to say about the geopolitics in AI because it's there. But taking this back home, where you need to be in terms of implementing AI for your business is focus on human work. Trust is important. You build it with your employees. People need to have control over their systems and go back to that feedback loop. I had a person yesterday come up to me and say, we have built that feedback loop that you're talking about. We've created a council of people in our organization that have a diverse set of skills and backgrounds. They're listening to what's going on and they are ready to share their opinions and their knowledge and making sure that the company does the right thing. And so that is very, very, very important. And that those feedback loops are there. And that creates a culture in your company of listening to employees and customers. So if you want to find out what the challenges are, they are many, but the opportunities mostly is to generate growth in your company culture and your people. And remember that everything we do in business, everything we do is human-centered. It should be human-centered because we don't operate at the whim of a computer. We operate due to the needs and desires of human beings to live happy and productive lives with liberty and freedom. And so that is where we look to the future. We look at technology as something that's good and it helps people's lives. So I want to thank you very much for your time, and I invite questions and comments on this video. Just put them in the if there's a comment section or chat, just stick them in there, and maybe we can have a discussion or dialogue about more of these things. So as I learn more information, I'm going to be updating that and putting it out there for others. So thank you very much.